All right, thanks everyone. I think the size is a bit good here. So yeah, Henry from Cairns Institute, James Cook University. So we'll be speaking about social license for existing and novel reef interventions. Most of it will be about COTS control, and in the end I hope I have a little bit of time to speak about REP interventions on which we're also working. First, acknowledgement of country. So we extend our deepest respect and recognition to all traditional owners of the Great Barrier Reef and its catchments as First Nations people holding the hopes, dreams, ambitions, and cultures of the reef. So I want to start with the contributors of the work that I will be presenting today. So this is the top is the people from Cairns Institute. Gillian here in the crowd, special thanks to you for a lot of the work that I will be presenting today. And we're also working together with people at UQ and REP who doing the surveys on which we will be drawing today. So just as an introduction, so on this, during this symposium we have heard a lot about COTS management. So just a little bit of an introduction. So although COTS are endemic to the GBR and reefs, other reefs across the Indo-Pacific, their predation on coral causes widespread ecosystem degradation, especially during these episodic surges. For this reason, they have been actively called on the GBR for more than 10 years and an increasingly larger number. So we saw a lot of that yesterday in the presentations. The legal control of COTS to date has not evoked widespread expressions of concern for debate in the public sphere. Ongoing approval, however, cannot be taken for granted. So that's something I'll be discussing today. So one of the reasons that we started with this research, which was funded under CSIP, was that there hasn't been any social science studies on COTS control, looking at how people actually perceive this management option in the reef that has been around for so many years. So how have we been studying this? So we've been doing a mixed study. So we're drawing on both quantitative and qualitative data. Both are, this data is collected as part of REP. So on the surveys, we're drawing on a little over 1,000 surveys with people in the Australian public. So that's both people in GBR communities, but also the general public. And we've been collecting data over 2 years, so in 2018 and 2022. And basically the data that I'm drawing on here is that we kind of ask people whether they support the large-scale deployment of the management of COTS, so the manual control of COTS on the GBR. And we're kind of looking at different predictors, so what makes some people more supportive of the management of COTS than others. So we look at 4 tiers of support. So we look at demographic factors, we look at values and threats, trust in management, and the perceived risks. And then we also draw on qualitative data. So that's a lot of the work from Gillian here in the audience. So she's done interviews with 140 people in 117 interviews. So most of the interviews were focused on REP, but there was also a lot of discussion on COTS. So that's what we'll be drawing on in this presentation. So for the survey data, just to go quickly through the results. So basically here, this is a graph that shows kind of on a scale from 1 to 7, going from like strong disagreement to strong agreement, how much people are supportive of the manual control of COTS. And in the other graph, you see kind of the different theories of support that we test to kind of see what are the major predictors of support. So I'll just go through the key findings. So we found that public support for the large-scale deployment of COTS control is widespread, right? So there's not a lot of disagreement with COTS control. However, it seems to be kind of tentative. So there's almost half of the people provide like either neutral or kind of slight agreement. So it's not like that everybody says that it's strong agreement with this intervention. And then we found that demographic variables are not the most important. We actually found that things like whether whether the GBR is important to people personally, that's really important. Whether people perceive COTS as a threat, that's really important. And also things like the trust in science and the perception of the risk of culling and the responsibility of culling. So I'll get back to that later. And then what's also interesting is that the perceived threat of climate change didn't really have an effect on support for COTS control. So for the qualitative results, so here we kind of drew on the interviews to draw to find kind of what are the major themes or the major domains, what we call it, of social license for cost control. So the first thing we did here, because we had also about 10 interviews with traditional owners, with multiple traditional owners across the GBR. So the first thing that's really important to highlight is that the kind of the traditional owner rights and responsibilities, that's not part of social license. It comes before that, right? So that's right holders, in a sense, it's different from stakeholders. So in our interviews, we really came across 4 domains. So this is consent, of course, what we heard, project involvement, but also really important, incorporation of cultural knowledge, and also early involvement, early engagement, right? So not just at the end of the process. In terms of the domains for the social license, so that's the bottom part of this diagram. So we found like 4 main domains. So the one is the ethical responsibility, the knowledge and rationale, the management effectiveness, and the socio-economic benefits. So this kind of shows that social license is not like a binary, a tick-off box. It actually, people are struggling with different elements of an intervention on the reef. So it's not like you can, it's just, yes, I support it. No, actually, there's some positives, there's some negatives, and people are weighing that. And so, yeah, there's kind of similar to the service, there's a level of ambivalence. You know, it's not like a really clear yes or a really clear no. And these domains can really help reef managers to strengthen the social license for cost culling. So in that sense, it's kind of a helpful tool. So we'll discuss shortly the implications for management, which might be what some of you are interested in here. So what's really interesting in the findings is that we find that if people perceive COTS as a threat, that's really a major predictor of support for cost control, while other things like whether people are perceive climate change as a threat or whether they think culling has a long-term benefit for the reef, that doesn't really affect support for cost control. So that's, in a way, that's kind of interesting, because it shows that some of the communication about cost control has been more focused on showing how it might benefit to complex issues like climate change, but our results may indicate that it might be better to instead highlight more how COTS are having a negative impact on the reef, and showing that might be a more powerful motivator for people to support cost control. Also, we found that really strong relationship between trust in scientific solutions and also the trust in the underlying knowledge about COTS. That's really a strong driver for support for cost control. So this kind of highlights that there could be more communication around the science behind COTS, and also one of the major issues one of the major things that was discussed in the interviews was that there's really some unclarity about what's actually causing these COTS outbreaks, right? So there's stuff about water pollution, which is a major driver, but then there's also some counter evidence that COTS might be happening in regions where there's no agriculture. So especially in GBR communities, there's some information, and so it would be good to have like a strong scientific statement that people can better understand how this complex thing of COTS actually works. And then also what we found in the ethical considerations in the social license domain. So people are really struggling with, on the one hand, COTS is an endemic species, so what gives us as people the right to take it out of the reef? But on the other hand, we also care about the reef. We also feel as people we have a responsibility to protect the reef from this species that is eating it en masse. So it's kind of that kind of struggle. It's more like, it's almost like an ambiguous thing. It's not so easy to decide, okay, should we care more about this animal that has a right to be there, or should we care about the coral that we're trying to protect, and how much are we as humans actually causing that COTS to proliferate over time, right? So what's our right position in that? That you come into a moral, ethical dilemma. So it's really hard to kind of address that by writing a scientific paper. It's something more that needs to be discussed between people in the table, and the public needs to be involved of that. So that's really the importance of that ethical dimension. So just to highlight, so just ending with some of the ongoing research we're doing. So within CSIP, we're doing kind of a study currently focused on more the novel control methods, so like the semiochemicals, the use of that method. So we're also trying to do a survey on seeing how people perceive that new methodology. And then we're also looking at the social license for REP interventions. So that's everything from protecting reefs. So a lot of the stuff that Kennedy was talking about before, from adaptive interventions, restorative interventions, and protective interventions. So kind of also drawing on that knowledge that we gained through studying cost control. So I'll just end with a slide with the main partners' acknowledgement, and I'm happy to take any questions.
So thank you. We have plenty of time for 2 or 3 questions.
Hello. I'm Shelley, Minister Lennard's advisor. I am wondering, I remember from one of the previous talks, there's a correlation between a lack of COTS outbreaks and green zones. So it kind of looks at, in places where there's green zones, it's less likely to be a COTS outbreak. And I also recall one of the traditional owners mentioning that we could have an increased focus on looking at the predators of COTS, which I know is a research topic, but just thinking about the relationship between these 2 concepts, and that it could be to do with ecological composition and trophic cascades, and how that feeds into the work that we're doing for COTS management. Yeah.
So what's your question to me?
My question is, how does the management in terms of green zones and actually looking at ecological composition feed into how we're managing COTS and how we're controlling COTS?
Yeah, so I'm not a cost manager or cost scientist, so we're just looking at how the people, how the community, GBR communities and the general public, what's their perception on how cost is management and the reasons for it. So, but a lot of the things you're discussing, that's also kind of what we put in that domain of knowledge and rationale. So there it's really like, yes, people in the GBR communities especially, they also know all the stuff. So fishing has an impact, agriculture has an impact, climate change might have an impact on COTS. So there's all these different drivers. So it's people are struggling with understanding actually how can we make this simple. What's the simple answers if there are any? So it's always hard with information, because even if you saw the presentations yesterday from, especially the keynote from Kabrumpa, they're like highlighting papers, one paper from 2004 in this journal and another paper from 2013 in another journal. You really need to have a good skills to be able to find the right papers to answer the right questions, because there's a lot of papers out there that are not relevant anymore, or they might not have the right knowledge. So how can we kind of translate that knowledge and make it accessible for the public to be well informed rather than maybe get their knowledge from the wrong sources?
Sure, thank you.
Are there any online questions in the Slido? Any further questions from the audience? If not, I'd like us to thank Henry very much.
Thank you.